Hello and welcome to this edition of Business PNG. Australia and Papua New Guinea have had a long-standing relationship. Most political decisions made in PNG since the 60s have been made around the fact that PNG was once a colony of Australia. But since the turn of the century, an argument still exists that connection has been an unfair arrangement, shedding light to the moral dimension. But this relationship is set to undergo major alterations in the coming years as anticipation rose to a new high at the 29th Australia PNG Business Forum held in Port Moresby this year. Tonight we delve into the world of partnership in business as we take a closer look at Australia and PNG's bilateral relationship. PNG is Australia's closest neighbour. With just above 2,000 kilometres separating the two countries, they sometimes share a love-hate relationship, one that at times is an interesting topic of debate.
As the PNG economy has grown, the economic relationship between Australia and PNG has grown too. Over the past 5 years, two-way trade has increased rapidly to more than 16 billion kina. The balance of trade stands by more than $1 billion in Papua New Guinea's favour.
The trade balance between PNG and Australia is absolutely one-sided. It is very simple. Australia has never really supported Papua New Guinea to develop industries where we are not really a market for them. And the classic case is cattle, dairy products. What have they done really under the aid program or any program to support us develop these industries and reduce imports?
As the years went on, PNG began to stumble. Infrastructure crumbled and law and order issues were on a rise. And it was all due to poor fiscal management by the government. Australian aid became an alternative source for stability, though it's also been the source of animosity between the two nations.
Much about whether we blew into town.
28 years ago, a business forum was launched that aimed to promote trade between PNG and Australia, more so in terms of investment into PNG. The annual Australia-PNG Business Conference has managed to create networks that has gone as far as the PNG and Australian governments and bureaucracy. With the goal to align business practice with government legislation, discussions have reached a new high in this year's forum. The 29th Australia-PNG Business Forum in Port Moresby this year brought one of Australia's senators to our shores. Matt Thistlethwaite, 2 weeks into office at the time, is Australia's new Parliamentary Secretary for Pacific Island Affairs. He reminded business representatives of the different aspects of the Australia-PNG relationship.
We certainly share much in common: our geography, our history, and our common political heritage. Our two peoples share many ties: personal, family, and of course sporting. And many Australians and Papua New Guineans now live in each other's countries.
Over 30% of Australia's bilateral aid packages have gone to PNG. Most argue that it's been mishandled, a likely reason behind the Howard government's little interest in Pacific Island matters. AusAid to PNG totaled approximately $491 million in 2012-2013, with a new direction on delivering improved outcomes, but in fewer sectors. That was revealed in the 2008 Bilateral Partnership for Development Agreement between the two nations. LNG spin-offs and consistent economy drivers have seen an uninterrupted 10-year economic boom as of last year. Prime Minister Peter O'Neill gladly announced a rise in real GDP.
Our economy will double its GDP by 2015. Again, that presents a unique opportunity for investors.
Increased inflationary pressures have hit hard on fiscal areas, but management measures in 2011 have lowered inflation to 7% from 10% in the first half of the year.
PNG is in the right part of the world. It is in the high-growing part of the world. It is increasingly linked to it.
The Papua New Guinea government expects revenues to remain subject to the instability of global prices for gold, copper and oil. Other commodities are taking a turn downhill, an imminent symptom of the Dutch disease. To curb that came the passing of the bill to establish a sovereign wealth fund. 100 billion kina will be placed into the fund through LNG exports come next year. That's 10 times the size of PNG's economy. Papua New Guinea hosted another major meet, the 21st Ministerial Forum, which was held on the 6th of December 2012 in Port Moresby. Co-chaired by Ministers of Foreign Affairs of both countries, talks also focused on the trade relationship. Ministers met with business and industry representatives and received a submission that contained the interests of the commercial sector.
And the communique for that forum noted the maturing of the bilateral relationship and dealt with the proposed economic cooperation treaty, immigration and people smuggling issues, law and justice cooperation, the defence partnership, and of course people-to-people links.
Key outcomes of the 2012 forum were released in a joint statement. In point number 14, the first objective is to strengthen trade, investment and private sector cooperation between the two countries. The talks continued in the 29th Australia PNG Business Forum in April. The APNG Forum was hosted by the Australia Papua New Guinea Business Council and the Business Council of PNG. Both councils are independent associations of businesses in both countries sharing the goal of achieving trade investment in PNG. The difficult implementation process of a public-private partnership. That's next. The annual bilateral business conference this year was attended by 298 delegates, partners, senior government, and private sector officials from both nations. One major aspect that the conference highlighted was the long and stressful process of implementation. Infrastructure under development and government procedures was a reality that all stakeholders are facing today. But planning for such a large exercise will take a considerable amount of effort from both the government and commercial sectors. Infrastructure, time for action, was the theme of the forum, and the Business Council of PNG was firm on its intention of working alongside the PNG government in infrastructure development.
The government just needs to share with us what its plans are. Then with our resources, we're able to then implement those plans.
Prime Minister Peter O'Neill delivered the keynote address of the forum, providing a scope of work for the government in the next 5 years. The much-talked-about deficit budget was mentioned, and the PM said he makes no apology for initiating a medium-term commitment, one he says will bring focus to PNG's economic infrastructure.
Over the next 5 years, we are committed to well over 12 billion kina in making sure that this investment program for infrastructure remains on target.
Australia was represented on the highest level by Parliamentary Secretary for Pacific Island Affairs, Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. He provided a summary of events that had taken place that attracted more attention from Australia. PNG is now the source of almost $16 billion in Australian investment.
Australian investment in PNG is now valued at more than $16 billion and two-way trade stands at $7 billion. Our investment level exceeds our investment in China and has benefited from the LNG and minerals boom having grown fivefold over the last 5 years.
But the business community pressed on about how the government was going to establish infrastructure development within a public-private partnership program. Discussions quickly swayed towards PNG's highly non-conducive business environment. What were highlighted were the long and stringent processes of what that partnership will have to face. Government procedures and various active and non-active legislations are among some of the most rigorous in the world. Visa classes for business personnel appeared to be an issue overriding the regulations of entry into the country.
They've agreed to look at a special class of visa, but once that's been agreed and the review is currently in progress, that needs to then go through and get the legislation drafted, go through NEC and then go through Parliament before that's enacted. So the issue from us is not so much the approval of what we were trying to recommend, but just the process it takes before things actually be implemented. We've been requesting, information from the Bills and Papers Office and the Legislative Council as to what the status of some of those enactments are that we believe are coming through, but what happened to them. And that's just like one kind of small example of something that the National Working Group's got on its plate.
Committee members of the National Working Group gave an update of the progress of work involved in creating effective dialogue between the commercial and government entities.
In order for this working group to have effectivity, it needed a supporting mechanism, an administrative supporting mechanism. So a National Working Group Secretariat was formed, and it sits in my department, working to undertake all the administrative responsibilities that come out of this National Working Group.
The Manufacturers Council of PNG, which chairs the Ports and Infrastructure Committee, tried to emphasize on the fact that most state-owned entities it works with often see cutbacks in their budgets, making it extremely difficult for commercial partners.
One of the things that is not there is that synergy through all of their submissions to Treasury about what's important. So quite often DCI's their submissions to the budget were for the programs that they administered, but they didn't lend support to things that PNG Ports needed to do, which was important for them so that the platform for business was conducive to doing business.
The International Financial Corporation, the commercial arm of the World Bank Group, suggested business modules used in other similar economies to lower electricity rates through decentralized networks of individual hydropower generators.
And that was done through a combination of small hydro projects, mini grids and solar home systems. So it doesn't have to be solved in a traditional way of saying, well, we need to put a huge grid system across the country. It was done through an analysis of how best to deliver energy to those people who needed it.
The PNG LNG, the source of PNG's massive wealth generation in the next half a century and beyond, has been a contributing entity to raising PNG's human resource capacity and infrastructure development in the highlands, Mumase and the southern regions. With 80% of the project complete, most of these infrastructure, including a 3.2-kilometer airstrip in Como, will become shared assets between Esso Highlands and the PNG government.
We recognise the impact of the project on some of the infrastructure in the country and have an ongoing program for maintenance and repair with the Department of Works through 2013 for the Highlands Highway.
A drastic improvement in internet rates in PNG is expected from a 10 gigabyte per second fiber optic gateway in Medang. The optic cable will ride on the 750-kilometer ExxonMobil LNG pipeline.
Should the state complete the link between Hides and across to Lae and Medang, that would open up a huge loop of telecommunications right across the nation.
The restructure of state-owned entities under Kumul Petroleum, Kumul Mining and Kumul Holdings and the intention of creating an organic law sent critics scrambling for answers. Public debates about the subject and the Sovereign Wealth Fund still continue, but the action by the government in restructuring the Independent Public Business Corporation is seen as a step in the right direction for the rehabilitation of state-owned enterprises. A summary by prominent lawyer Stephen Kami portrayed the vision of implementation, infrastructure and partnership was somewhat revolutionary, taking into consideration PNG's track record.
As we develop the economy, the percentage of trade that would represent in terms of the trade figures for PNG should go down. So please remember that, because I think that's important. In the future, if our figures of our trade with Australia goes up and keeps going up, then something's wrong because we're not hitting Asia. That's where the market is.
But President of the Australia PNG Business Council, Peter Taylor, was confident the new government will drive a successful economy with continued dialogue between the public and private sector.
I know that we've all heard many of these promises before, but I just do get the impression there's a new energy being injected into government in this country. Prime Minister O'Neill, it seems to me, has got a vision. he's got a plan, and he's output driven. Now, of course, as Stephen's rightly said, we've got to see on the output end what happens.
When we come back, Peter Taylor on the Business Council's activities. In the next two segments, President of the Australia PNG Business Council, Peter Taylor, tells us how PNG and Australia can work together to improve the business environments in PNG. In January, Prime Minister Peter O'Neill made a firm stand that 2013 will be the year of implementation. With that remark came a major budget allocation to infrastructure development, and the APNG Business Council believes the delivery aspect of that promise is key to attracting more investment into the country.
I have with me Peter Taylor, the President of the Australia PNG Business Council. Peter, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Now, Peter, you have a conference going on at the moment. What's the theme of the conference?
That's correct. And our theme this year is infrastructure, the need to develop infrastructure for the future and to use the resources that Papua New Guinea and the revenue Papua New Guinea is now enjoying to build for more investment for present and in the future.
And what kind of speakers have you got and what are they speaking on?
Well, we've had the Prime Minister open the conference. We've had a Senator from Australia speak on behalf of the Australian Government. We've had Charles Abel speak about the detail of infrastructure because that's his portfolio. And we've got a range of experts on a number of infrastructure topics to speak today.
What do you think PNG businesses should be looking at the moment, particularly in terms of infrastructure?
Well, the country, as the Prime Minister has admitted, has allowed infrastructure to run down over a long period of time. So it's an enormous job to rebuild, but you know, it doesn't matter what you look at, there is a need for something to happen, whether it's roads, whether it's ports, whether it's airports, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, even communications, the ability to transmit these days internet services across the country. All of those things need attention, and I have to say the program that the Prime Minister outlined is an ambitious one, but it's also a very exciting and necessary one.
Now, I know that Australia is undergoing a lot of investment in telecommunications all around the country, the size of Australia being what it is. Is there something that our businesses here can learn from that?
Well, I think it's a global trend. Australia's got its particular approach to it. I wouldn't suggest that it's necessarily the right approach for Papua New Guinea, but the Prime Minister has announced that there is going to be an upgrade to the broadband services in this country, and business needs that because these days communication, the speed of communication, the amount of information that businesses need to be able to transmit and download requires a lot of bandwidth, which PNG currently doesn't have. And obviously, the more you can do to facilitate business, the more likely you are to get additional investment. And also, the cost structure comes down, and that's important because PNG competes, as does Australia, competes with countries globally for capital and for investment, so you've got to make this place work and it's got to be attractive to the investor.
Do you think the government currently is taking some positive steps towards improving telecommunications, specifically for business?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the announcements that have been made, the budget allocation, it's all there. There's been a lot of talk about infrastructure over a long period of time, but what has been lacking is the delivery. Now, the Prime Minister and Minister Abel are focused on the delivery aspect of the program, and that is something that's absolutely essential, and they want to do it soon. They recognise that PNG has a couple of very important events coming up. 2015, it's going to host some games here. It's looking to bid for the APEC meeting in 2018, and it wants to showcase the country as it should to those important visitors, and it needs to have this infrastructure in place for that. And of course, when you build this infrastructure, it's for events like that, it's still there when the event's over, so the country's got it for a long period of time. and that then allows other business to develop as a result of it. So it's a multiplier effect, and that's really what we're looking for.
With other infrastructure, power supply, for instance, will that be discussed at this conference?
It will be. It's already been mentioned by the Prime Minister and Minister Abel. Power is important. Any of us who spend a lot of time in Port Moresby, for example, will know the lights come on and off randomly sometimes. The reliability factor is just not there. There needs to be more power because you need power to drive industry, but you also must have reliable power. There are certain industries where when the power goes out, you've either got to put in very sophisticated standby power that comes in within milliseconds, or you're going to lose production. And some types of businesses, once the power goes off, it does take a considerable amount of time to boot up again. And that's just a loss to everybody. It's a loss to that business, but ultimately it's a loss to this country because that's wasted opportunity.
More of that interview when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. When the resource boom eventually ends, Papua New Guinea will need to maintain itself through sustainable business activities. Various small to medium-sized businesses are proven to stimulate growth and service the larger corporate and private organizations. In this segment, Peter Taylor explains how PNG can direct its business prospects for mutual benefits.
Has the government indicated that, to your understanding, that there is going to be some capacity building for power supply?
There is, and there's also going to be the opportunity for private investment in the power sector, and I'm hoping that that will bring some efficiencies that haven't been there in the past.
Now, why should Papua New Guinea be interested in the developments between PNG and Australia? What is the relationship there?
The relationship is on many levels. Obviously, we're geographically neighbours. That means in terms of transport for goods and services, it should be more cost effective than other potential investors in Papua New Guinea. There's been a long history of Australian investment here, and indeed we swap citizens, residents on a regular basis. There are a lot of Papua New Guineans working and living in Australia. There's a lot of Australians working and living here. So there's that people-to-people connection as well. We understand one another. We don't have any problems about building relationships before we do business in one another's country, because we are essentially in this region. We understand one another. Our education system's the same. Even our governments were handed to us, from the British system and so on. So there are all those similarities and connections that tell us that there's some obvious synergies between Australia and PNG in terms of business and development. But right now in PNG, internally, there is insufficient capital for Papua New Guinean companies and even the government to build and develop all of the industries that it might like to do. So it needs to bring capital in from somewhere else. Australian businesses understand Papua New Guinea. They understand both the risks and the rewards of investing here, and they're happy to invest in Papua New Guinea. So you've got that pool of capital from some large Australian companies that can be utilised here in Papua New Guinea. Obviously those businesses are here to make a profit, but there is a mutual benefit in all of this, because it generates even a big project, a resource project here, for example, whilst it might be built by an Australian company, it then produces an opportunity for smaller businesses that are run by local people that are needed to service that operation. So it stimulates growth within the PNG economy, and it also, when that project finally will close, in the resource project, you've got some sustainable businesses that have developed as a result of the project. So, I mean, there are just so many reasons why it makes sense for Papua New Guinea and Australia to do business together.
And the Australia PNG Business Council obviously plays a key role in this? It
does, because the council of which I'm president represents Australian investors in Papua New Guinea. We don't only have an interest in our members having a profitable operation here, but we're also very interested in making sure that Papua New Guinea thrives, that the people of Papua New Guinea have a better life, better health services, better education. Because, you know, from a business, there's a business case for this, because obviously if you have a well-educated, healthy workforce, and we want to employ Papua New Guineans. We do not want to bring Australians up here to work in our businesses if we can avoid it. It is just too expensive. It doesn't make sense. So wherever there's an opportunity to employ a Papua New Guinean, we will do it. But we have to get the skill levels up to where we need them to be, because we have to be internationally competitive.
That's right. How does the Council view the current changes that the government's implementing? Well,
first of all, I can speak about the government itself. I have a very good feeling about this government. You can see you've got what has changed. You've got another generation, the next generation of young, energetic, well-educated, extremely clever politicians coming through. When I listen to the Prime Minister, people like Charles Abel speak, I can sense these people have purpose, they understand what's needed, they have a plan, and they have a strategy for implementation. So all of that tells me that PNG is in good hands in terms of its political leadership. In terms of the program that's being announced, it's a very ambitious program. There's a lot to be done, but as the Prime Minister said, PNG can wait to see what its revenue stream is, save some money up, and then when it's got the money in the bank, then spend it on doing development. That's one way of doing it. It's not the way business does it, by the way. But business does, it goes out and borrows. You have to have a plan, of course. You have to have a feasibility study that tells you can borrow X amount of money and ultimately be able to pay it back and then get a return for yourself. Now, this government is starting to look at infrastructure in PNG and funding it in that way. The Prime Minister has said PNG cannot wait for the revenue that it will get in the future to be in hand before it does these projects. What it needs to do, and some borrowing will be needed for this, it needs to get that infrastructure built now, because that infrastructure is needed to not only service the development we have in the country now, the economic development we have in the country now, but actually to exponentially increase the investment, because the infrastructure to support it is already here.
Right. Thank you for your time, Peter.
Thank you.
Peter Taylor, President of the Australia PNG Business Council.
And that's all we have time for this week. If you'd like to watch the show and previous editions, please log on to the EMTV site and go to our page. That's www.mtv.com.pg. If you'd like to make a comment or make suggestions, you can email us at businesspng@mtv.com.pg. And don't forget to like our page on Facebook. I'm Hannah Aria. We'll see you again next week.